The sky above Verdania did not behave like a normal sky. It never had. It shimmered faintly, not because of clouds, but because millions of microscopic atmospheric regulators hovered invisibly in the upper layers, adjusting temperature, humidity, and sunlight with obsessive precision. The result was a sky that always looked perfect, which Thomas Rivera found deeply suspicious. On Earth, the sky had moods. It got angry, it cried, it forgot things. Verdania's sky remembered everything and forgave nothing. Thomas stood behind his modest cooking stall at the edge of the Grand Bloom Gardens, staring at a pot of gently simmering sauce as if it might suddenly develop independent political ambitions. On Verdania, that was not entirely impossible. He had once seen a decorative vine reroute an irrigation drone because it disliked the angle of the water. The drone had apologized. The sauce, thankfully, remained loyal. He leaned forward slightly and inhaled. Basil, garlic, olive oil. Real earth ingredients. Well, mostly real. The basil had been grown in his personal hydroponic tray, which was technically illegal because Verdania classified unapproved earth plant DNA as culturally destabilizing organic material. Thomas classified it as tasting like home, which he felt was a much more reasonable legal category. Behind him, a small floating drone emitted a disapproving beep. "I am detecting uneven chopping pattern," said B12. Thomas did not turn around. "I am detecting uneven emotional support," he replied. B12 hovered closer, its polished, spherical body reflecting the garden's endless colors. "Your sarcasm has been noted and archived for future passive-aggressive use." "Good," Thomas said. "Make sure it's alphabetized." The Grand Bloom Gardens stretched endlessly in every direction, a masterpiece of alien bioengineering. Towering plants with translucent leaves glowed faintly from within, their veins pulsing with soft blue light as nutrients moved through them. Some flowers floated freely in the air, tethered only by thin strands of gravitational manipulation fields. Others rotated slowly, tracking the sun like curious observers. And everywhere people moved. Aliens of dozens of species walked the winding garden paths, their forms ranging from almost human to deeply unsettling. Some had skin like polished stone. Others shimmered faintly, their bodies partially phased between dimensions to reduce joint pain, or so Thomas had been told. He tried not to stare. He had learned early that staring at interdimensional visitors was considered rude in at least 9 cultures and legally binding in 2. Today was worse than usual. Today was the Interstellar Unity Festival, which meant diplomats. Diplomats were, in Thomas's professional opinion, the most dangerous creatures in the known universe. They smiled constantly and never said what they meant. At least predators were honest. A tall alien with 4 arms approached the stall, its formal robes dragging slightly behind it. Its face was smooth and expressionless, like a sculpture that had given up on emotions. "Food vendor," it said. Thomas winced internally. He hated that title. "Yes," Thomas said. "That's me. Professional food vendor. I vend food, occasionally successfully." The alien stared at him. Thomas stared back. B12 slowly rotated away, pretending not to be associated with him. The alien gestured at the pot. "Explain its purpose." Thomas blinked. "Its purpose?" "Yes." Thomas considered this carefully. "To make people slightly less sad." The alien paused. It leaned closer, its smooth face reflecting the steam rising from the pot. "I will attempt to experience this reduction in sadness," it said. Thomas handed it a small bowl. The alien took a cautious bite. It froze. Thomas waited. After a long moment, the alien spoke again. "Acceptable." It walked away. Thomas exhaled. "High praise," he muttered. B12 emitted a supportive beep that somehow sounded sarcastic. Thomas wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned back slightly, watching the endless movement of the festival. Music drifted through the air, produced by instruments that did not resemble instruments. One device appeared to be a floating crystal that sang when people walked past it. Another was a small mechanical insect that generated complex harmonic vibrations by flexing its wings. Verdania loved beauty. Verdania required beauty. Verdania was built to impress. Thomas did not belong here. He knew that in the quiet, unspoken way, people know things they cannot change. He was human, from Earth, from a small city that no one on this planet had ever heard of, and if they had, they would have politely pretended not to care. He had arrived on Verdania 5 years ago, part of a cultural exchange program that sounded far more important than it actually was. In reality, it meant he cooked food while important people discussed important things nearby. He was decoration, edible decoration, but he did not resent it. Because here, in this small corner of an impossibly beautiful world, he had something simple. He had control over one thing: flavor. He reached into his small hydroponic tray and gently plucked a fresh basil leaf. It was bright green, vibrant, alive. He held it carefully like something fragile. Because it was. It was earth. He dropped it into the sauce. The scent rose immediately, warm and familiar. For a moment, the endless alien garden disappeared. For a moment, he was somewhere smaller, somewhere louder, somewhere real. Behind him, B12 spoke again. "You are smiling," the drone observed. Thomas blinked. He hadn't noticed. "Am I?" "Yes." B12 paused. "This is statistically unusual." Thomas chuckled softly. "Don't get used to it." He picked up the wooden spoon and stirred the sauce slowly. Around him, the festival continued. Diplomats negotiated, soldiers guarded, machines observed. And above it all, Verdania's perfect sky watched silently, adjusting itself with infinite care, as if it knew something was about to change. Thomas, of course, knew nothing. He was just a chef, and he was about to serve the most important meal of his life. Queen Elara had learned, very early in her life, that silence was safer than honesty. Silence could not be misinterpreted. Silence could not offend diplomats, threaten alliances, or accidentally start wars. Silence was obedient. Silence was loyal. Silence never betrayed you in front of 17 foreign ambassadors and one extremely judgmental aquatic delegate who communicated exclusively through disappointed bubbles. So Elara had perfected silence. She moved through the Grand Bloom Gardens, surrounded by her royal escort, her posture straight, her expression calm, her long ears angled slightly upward in a position her tutors had once described as reassuring but not approachable. It had taken years to master that exact angle. Too low and she appeared submissive, too high and she appeared aggressive. Neutral flowers opened wider. Pathways subtly. Flowers opened wider. Pathways subtly adjusted their curvature to ease her movement. Even the ambient light shifted slightly, recalibrating itself to complement the reflective surfaces of her ceremonial armor. She hated it, not the beauty. The beauty was real. She hated the anticipation. Every movement she made was watched, measured, analyzed. Not because she was loved, but because she was necessary. There was a difference. She had understood that difference since she was old enough to recognize that her name was spoken differently depending on who was speaking it. Behind her, advisor Halveth leaned closer, his voice carefully controlled. "The trade delegation from Syraxis is requesting confirmation regarding the atmospheric harvesting rights," he said. Of course they were. They were always requesting something. Elara nodded once, a precise and economical movement. "We will review their proposal." Halveth inclined his head. He never walked beside her, always slightly behind, close enough to advise, far enough to deny responsibility if needed. He was very good at his job. Too good. They continued forward. A group of visitors from a distant crystalline civilization stood nearby, their bodies refracting sunlight into fragments that scattered across the garden floor like fallen stars. They bowed as she passed. She bowed in return. Protocol was a language more rigid than mathematics. She spoke it fluently, and then something interrupted the pattern. At first it was nothing, just a sensation, a subtle disturbance in the emotional field around her. Her people were sensitive to such things. Not telepathy, exactly. More like resonance. Emotional frequencies carried through tone, scent, movement. Most environments produced predictable emotional signatures. Diplomats produced anxiety. Soldiers produced vigilance. Politicians produced exhaustion. But this was different. Warm, unstructured, alive. She stopped walking. Halveth noticed immediately. "Your Majesty," he asked quietly. She did not answer. Her ears had already turned, angling toward the source of the sensation. Halveth followed her gaze and frowned slightly. "There is nothing of strategic importance in that direction," he said. Elara began walking anyway. Halveth hesitated. This was not part of the schedule. Schedules were sacred. Schedules prevented chaos. But she was already moving. The escort followed instantly, their armor whispering softly as they adjusted formation. They passed through layers of the festival, leaving behind the carefully curated zones of political interaction and entering the more organic regions of the gardens. Here the plants grew with less direct oversight, their shapes more expressive, less controlled. The sensation grew stronger, and then she smelled it. It was impossible. Her entire body froze, not out of fear, out of recognition. The scent was simple, unrefined, unengineered, real. It carried memory, not recent memory, ancient memory, memory from before Verdania had become Verdania, before conquest, before responsibility, before she had learned silence. Halveth spoke again, more urgently now. "Your Majesty, this area contains only auxiliary festival vendors. There is no reason." She stepped forward and saw him. He stood behind a small, unimpressive stall, human, male. His posture relaxed in a way no one in her presence had ever allowed themselves to be. He stirred a pot slowly, his movements uncalculated, unobserved, except by a small floating drone that appeared to be judging him aggressively. The human spoke. "You're hovering too close," he said. "I am optimizing observational efficiency," the drone replied. "You're optimizing my stress levels. That is an unintended but acceptable side effect." The human sighed. Elara felt something shift inside her chest. It was a small movement, but it was real. Halveth stepped slightly forward. "Your Majesty, I strongly advise." She raised her hand. He stopped. The human looked up. Their eyes met. And for the first time in years, someone did not look at her like she was inevitable. He looked at her like she was unexpected. It was a small difference, but it was enormous. He blinked once, then twice. Then to her astonishment, he spoke. "Hi," he said. Halveth nearly stopped existing. The escort froze. Protocol collapsed silently around them. Elara did not know what to say. No one had spoken to her like that since she was a child. No title, no hesitation, just acknowledgement. She stepped closer. The scent surrounded her now. She could feel it, deeper than smell. It resonated with something buried. The human glanced nervously at the guards. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. The drone beside him answered immediately. "Statistically, yes." Elara stared at him. He stared at her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not feel like a queen. She felt like someone standing at the edge of something she did not understand. Something dangerous. Something alive. Something that did not care about silence. Thomas Rivera had made many mistakes in his life. He had once trusted a self-cleaning oven that had not, in fact, been emotionally ready for that level of responsibility. He had once attempted to cook synthetic protein imported from the Draxian belt, only to discover it was technically still alive and deeply opposed to being sautéed. And once, during his second year on Verdania, he had accidentally insulted an ambassador by calling his ceremonial armor cute. This, however, was new, because standing in front of him, surrounded by armed guards in silent panic, was a woman with long, elegant ears and the unmistakable presence of someone who had never waited in line for anything. And she was looking at him, not past him, not through him, at him. Thomas's brain, normally an enthusiastic participant in his daily survival, chose that moment to quietly step outside and lie down. He did the only thing he could. He held up the spoon. "Would you like to try some?" he asked. Behind her, several guards subtly shifted their stance in the universal body language of people preparing to prevent history from happening. The floating drone beside Thomas leaned slightly closer. "This is either the bravest or least intelligent decision you have ever made," B12 said. "Thank you," Thomas whispered. That was not a compliment. The woman did not move immediately. Her eyes, calm but intense, studied him with a focus that made his skin feel transparent. Her ears tilted slightly forward, reacting not to sound, but to something else. He suddenly became very aware of his posture. and his hands, and the fact that his apron had a small stain shaped vaguely like disappointment. She stepped closer. The guards followed reluctantly, like gravity obeying an argument it disagreed with. Thomas held out the bowl. His hand was steady. He was proud of that. Internally, he was experiencing 17 different forms of panic. She looked down at the bowl. Steam rose gently from its surface, carrying the scent of basil and garlic into the carefully controlled air of Verdania. Her fingers reached forward. They were steady, precise. Not the hands of someone unfamiliar with power, but there was hesitation there too. She took the bowl. Behind her, one of the advisors made a very small choking sound, as if trying to inhale a future that no longer made sense. Thomas watched her carefully. She picked up the utensil, paused, and took a bite. The universe did not explode. Thomas considered that a positive outcome. At first, nothing happened. She simply stood there, processing. Then her eyes changed. It was subtle, but undeniable. Her posture, so perfectly constructed, faltered by a fraction. Her ears trembled slightly, not in fear, in recognition. Thomas frowned. He had seen that expression before, not on royalty, on homesick people. She did not speak. She took another bite, slower this time, as if confirming something. Behind her, the guards exchanged confused glances. They had trained for assassination attempts, terrorist attacks, interdimensional incursions. They had not trained for pasta. B-12 rotated slightly, its optical sensors narrowing. Her biometric readings indicate elevated neural activity, the drone said quietly. Thomas leaned slightly toward it. Is that good? Unclear. She may be transcending. I was hoping for enjoying. She lowered the utensil slowly. Her eyes lifted to meet his. There was something there now. Not authority, not command, memory. She spoke. What is this? Her voice was calm, but it carried depth. It was not amplified, yet everyone heard it. Thomas blinked. Pasta, he said. The words sounded strangely small in the open air between them. She frowned slightly. This word, pasta. He nodded. It's from Earth. Her ears shifted again at the word Earth. He noticed. He didn't know why that mattered, but it did. She looked down at the bowl again, as if it might explain itself. This taste, she said quietly. She stopped. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the bowl. Thomas waited. Everyone waited. Verdania itself seemed to pause, its endless systems quietly observing. She looked back at him. This taste is alive. Thomas smiled faintly. Yeah, he said. That's the idea. Behind her, one of the advisors looked like he might faint. Another appeared to be silently negotiating with several gods. She took another bite. Slower. Careful. Thomas noticed something else. Her breathing had changed. It was subtle, but it was no longer the measured, controlled breathing of someone trained to exist without weakness. It was human. Well, almost human. He felt something unexpected. Not fear, not pride, concern. Because whatever this meant, it mattered. B-12 leaned closer again. You appear to have destabilized a monarch, the drone said. Thomas exhaled slowly. Yeah, he murmured. I probably should have charged extra. She lowered the bowl. Her eyes remained on him, not as a queen observing a subject, but as a person standing at the edge of something they did not understand. And for reasons Thomas could not explain, he had the distinct and terrifying feeling that nothing in his life would ever be simple again. No one moved. The entire garden seemed to have entered a state of quiet, collective confusion, as if reality itself had misplaced an important instruction manual. Verdania's environmental regulators continued their invisible work, maintaining perfect atmospheric balance, but even they could not correct whatever had just shifted between the queen and the human chef. Queen Elara held the bowl carefully, as though it contained something far more fragile than food. Her fingers did not tremble, but something else did, something behind her composure. Her long ears remained angled forward, not in command, but in attention. Thomas became painfully aware that he was still holding the spoon in midair. He slowly lowered it. Behind Elara, Advisor Halveth leaned toward one of the royal guards and whispered something urgently. The guard did not respond, mostly because he was staring at Thomas like one might stare at a small animal that had accidentally hacked into a planetary defense system. Thomas cleared his throat. "So," he said gently, "that's Basil." Silence. Halveth looked like he might age 10 years. The Queen tilted her head slightly. "Basil," she repeated. Thomas nodded. "It's a plant. From Earth." She looked at the bowl again, studying it as if the word Earth had altered its molecular structure. "Elaborate," she said. Thomas blinked. "Elaborate?" "Yes." He hesitated. No one had ever asked him to elaborate on basil before. "Well," he said slowly, "it grows in dirt. It needs sunlight, water, patience." He paused. "And someone who doesn't forget about it for 3 days." B12 rotated slightly. "You forgot about it for 4 days, the drone said." Thomas ignored it. The Queen's expression did not change, but her ears shifted slightly, reacting to the rhythm of his voice rather than the words themselves. "You grew this here," she said. It was not a question. Thomas nodded. "Yeah." Halveth stepped forward slightly. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "this organism has not been cleared through Verdania's botanical stability protocols." Thomas winced. Organism. That was never a good sign. The Queen raised one hand. Halveth stopped speaking immediately. She did not look at him. She was still looking at Thomas. "You brought part of your world here," she said. Thomas shrugged slightly. "I guess I did." He hesitated. "I missed it." The words escaped before he could stop them. He hadn't planned to say that. The Queen's ears twitched. Not dramatically, but enough. She understood that word. Missed. It carried weight. She looked around the garden, at the endless perfection engineered to satisfy everyone and no one. Verdania did not miss things. Verdania replaced them. She spoke again. "This taste," she said quietly, "it reminds me of something." Thomas waited. He did not interrupt. Even B12 remained silent, which Thomas considered a historic achievement. Elara's fingers tightened slightly on the bowl. "When I was young," she said, her voice calm but distant, "I traveled to a colony world at the edge of our territory." Halveth shifted uncomfortably. This was not a story he had heard before. "There was a settlement there," she continued, "small, inefficient, poor." She paused. "They grew their own food." Her eyes unfocused slightly, as though seeing something far away. "They did not grow it for optimization." Another pause. "They grew it because it mattered to them." Thomas did not speak. He understood that tone. Memory did not need encouragement. "They offered me a meal," she said. Her ears lowered slightly now, not in weakness, but in something softer. "I had never tasted anything that was not designed." She looked down at the bowl again. "This feels the same." The words hung in the air. Halveth looked deeply uncomfortable. Thomas, on the other hand, felt something unexpected. Not pride, connection. He leaned slightly against the edge of the stall. "Well," he said gently, "designed food usually tastes like it knows it's being watched." The Queen blinked. He continued, "This doesn't care who you are." Silence. Then something impossible happened. She smiled. It was small, barely visible, but real. Halveth made a quiet sound that might have been a suppressed scream. B12 recorded the moment immediately. "This expression has not been observed in 3,442 hours, the drone said helpfully. Thomas glanced at it. "Please don't ruin this." "I ruin everything equally," B12 replied. The Queen looked at Thomas again. Not as a ruler, not as a symbol, as a person trying to understand something she had never been allowed to have. "You created this," she said. Thomas shook his head slightly. "I just helped it happen." She studied him carefully. He was not impressive, not physically, not politically, not strategically. He stood unevenly, his apron worn, his hands marked with small burns and old scars earned in kitchens no one remembered. He was, by every measurable standard, insignificant. And yet, he had done something no one else had managed. He had given her something real. Around them, the festival continued, unaware that something fragile and dangerous had begun. Not war, not alliance. Something far less predictable. Understanding. The Queen lowered the bowl slowly. But she did not let it go. Not yet. Not ever if she could help it. Queen Elara did not return the bowl immediately. That fact alone caused 3 separate diplomatic prediction algorithms to crash simultaneously somewhere beneath the palace. She stood in front of Thomas's small stall, holding the simple ceramic container as though it were an object of unknown gravitational properties. Her fingers rested lightly against its surface, but her attention remained on him. Not his uniform, he didn't have one. Not his rank, he didn't have one of those either. Just him. Thomas, unfortunately, was having difficulty remembering how breathing worked. He performed a small test inhale. Success. Encouraged, he attempted a slightly larger inhale. Partial success. B12 hovered near his shoulder. Your respiration pattern indicates escalating panic, the drone said. Thank you, Thomas whispered. You are welcome. I exist to document your decline. Behind the Queen, Advisor Halveth leaned toward another official, his face frozen in an expression of professional distress. This is not in the schedule, Halveth murmured. No, the other official replied faintly. It is not. Elara took another bite, slowly, carefully. Her eyes did not leave Thomas. He shifted his weight awkwardly. He had served food to hundreds of people on Verdania. None of them had ever looked at him like this. Not like he was important. It made him deeply uncomfortable and strangely warm. She lowered the utensil again. This dish, she said quietly. What is its designation? Thomas blinked. Designation? Yes. He scratched the back of his neck. It's just pasta. She frowned slightly. Just? Thomas shrugged. Where I'm from, it's normal. Halveth made a choking sound. The Queen's ears tilted forward slightly. Normal, she repeated. She said the word like it was foreign, which technically it was. She looked around the garden, at the endless perfection surrounding them. Every plant optimized, every color balanced, every element engineered to satisfy aesthetic and ecological precision. Nothing here was normal. Everything here was intentional. Everything except him. She looked back at Thomas. You consider this insignificant, she said. He hesitated. I consider it enough. The words settled between them. B12 rotated slowly. That was emotionally inefficient, the drone observed. Thomas ignored it. The Queen stepped closer. Her guards shifted immediately, their armor whispering as defensive systems recalibrated. Invisible scanning fields flickered briefly across Thomas's body, analyzing threat potential. He tried not to take it personally. Elara stopped only a short distance from him now, close enough that he could see the faint, natural imperfections in her skin. Not flaws, just reality. Her ears tilted slightly, reacting to his heartbeat. She could hear it, fast, uncontrolled, alive. You created this, she said again. Thomas exhaled softly. I've burned it plenty of times too. She tilted her head. Burned. He nodded. Yeah, failure. She considered this. On Verdania, failure was something systems corrected automatically. Here was someone who experienced it regularly and survived. She lowered the bowl slowly, but she did not give it back. Instead, she asked, Why do you cook? Thomas blinked. That was not a question he expected from a queen. He thought about it. He could have said many things. He chose the truth. Because it makes people feel less alone. Silence. Behind her, Halveth looked like he was reconsidering every career decision that had led him here. Elara did not speak immediately. Her ears lowered slightly, not in submission, but in something far more dangerous. Vulnerability. She looked at the bowl, then at him. Then before any advisor, guard, or predictive political system could intervene, she spoke. Marry me. The universe stopped, not metaphorically. Verdania's atmospheric regulators experienced a brief synchronization delay. A nearby floating flower lost its assigned gravity vector and drifted sideways in quiet confusion. B12 emitted a soft clicking noise. I believe she has initiated a permanent cohabitation proposal, the drone said helpfully. Thomas stared at her. He was certain he had misheard. He glanced behind him. There was nowhere to escape to. He looked back at her. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "What?" Her expression did not change. She was calm, certain. Halveth, on the other hand, was dying internally. "You cannot possibly," Halveth began. She raised her hand. He stopped. Immediately. She did not look at him. She looked only at Thomas. "I wish to form a permanent bond with you," she said. Thomas's brain attempted to process the sentence. It failed, spectacularly. "I made pasta," he said weakly. "Yes." "That's all I did." "Yes." B12 leaned closer. "This is an unusually high return on investment," the drone observed. Thomas swallowed. He studied her face. She was not joking. She did not look impulsive. She looked honest. And underneath that honesty, lonely. He realized something then. This was not about power. This was about escape. Not escape from responsibility. Escape from isolation. He exhaled slowly. His hands still smelled faintly of basil. "You don't even know me," he said gently. Her ears tilted forward again. "I know how you make people feel," she replied. He did not have an answer to that. Around them, the entire political structure of Verdania stood frozen, waiting for reality to resume behaving normally. It did not. Thomas Rivera had never been escorted by 12 armed guards before. He decided he did not like it. They walked in perfect formation around him, their armor emitting faint, almost polite mechanical sounds with each synchronized step. Their helmets concealed their faces, but their attention was unmistakable. Individuals in your position rarely remain calm. "I am not calm," Thomas whispered. "Your external panic leakage remains within acceptable parameters." "I don't know what that means." "It means you have not screamed yet." He considered it. "That's fair." The palace rose ahead of them, its structure both beautiful and unsettling. It was not built in the traditional sense. It had grown. Verdania's architects used guided biostructural engineering, shaping living materials into towering forms that pulsed faintly with internal energy. The walls shimmered with subtle motion, like the surface of a calm lake disturbed by invisible currents. It was alive, not conscious, but aware enough to respond. As they approached, the entrance unfolded smoothly, layers of organic architecture separating with quiet obedience. Thomas stopped walking. He stared at it. "I live in a converted supply closet," he said. B12 hovered slightly closer. "This represents an improvement." "I don't trust improvements." They resumed walking. Inside, the air was cooler, perfectly balanced. Soft light flowed from the walls themselves, eliminating the need for visible sources. Every surface was flawless, not sterile, intentional, too intentional. Queen Elara walked ahead of him, her posture unchanged, her movements precise. She had not spoken since her proposal. Thomas appreciated that. He was still trying to reboot his existence. Behind them, Advisor Halveth was whispering furiously into a small communication device. "Yes," Halveth hissed quietly. "No, she is not joking. I assure you, I would prefer that she were." Thomas glanced at B12. "Is this normal?" "No." "That's comforting." They entered a large chamber. The walls curved upward into impossible shapes, supported by structural principles Thomas did not understand and suspected were personally offended by gravity. Elara stopped walking. She turned to face him. The guard stopped immediately. Halveth stopped breathing. Thomas stopped thinking. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Up close, without the distraction of the garden, she seemed different, less distant, her long ears angled slightly toward him, reacting not to sound, but to his presence. He realized she was nervous. That thought alone nearly caused his brain to collapse. "You may speak freely here," she said. Thomas blinked. "I don't know what to say." "That is acceptable." He hesitated. "You meant it," he said. It was not a question. She did not hesitate. "Yes." Halveth made a quiet sound that might have been a suppressed emotional breakdown. Thomas rubbed his hands together nervously. "You don't know anything about me." She tilted her head slightly. "I know that you create without obligation." He frowned. "That sounds more impressive than it is." B12 rotated slowly. "He also forgets to sleep when emotionally distressed." "Please stop helping," Thomas muttered. Elara watched him carefully. He was uncomfortable. He did not hide it. He did not attempt to perform confidence. He was real. That alone made him more dangerous than any diplomat. I do not require perfection, she said. Thomas laughed softly. That's good, because I am extremely bad at perfection. She studied his face. He was not afraid of her. He was afraid of what this meant. That distinction mattered. Around them, the palace remained silent, its living structure quietly observing. He looked around. This place, he said, does it ever feel too quiet? She did not answer immediately. Yes, she said finally. He nodded slowly. I think I understand that. Halva stepped forward carefully. Your Majesty, there are implications. She did not look at him. I am aware. Thomas glanced between them. I don't want to break your world, he said. She looked back at him. You did not break it. She paused. You revealed it. He did not know how to respond to that. B12 leaned slightly toward him. This is the part where most humans experience emotional overload. Thomas exhaled slowly. Yeah, he whispered. I noticed. Elara stepped closer, not as a queen approaching a subject, as a person approaching uncertainty. Her ears tilted forward slightly. She could hear his heartbeat, still fast, still alive, still here. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she realized something terrifying. She did not want him to leave. Thomas Rivera did not sleep that night, not because he was forbidden to, not because the palace lacked accommodations. In fact, the room provided to him was larger than his entire apartment, with walls that adjusted their color based on his emotional state. Unfortunately, his emotional state appeared to be permanent confusion, and the walls had settled on a deeply concerned shade of blue. He sat at the edge of the bed staring at his hands. They were the same hands, still marked by small burns, still faintly smelling of basil. Nothing about him had changed, and yet everything had. B12 hovered nearby, its optical sensors dimmed to simulate something resembling privacy. You have entered what humans describe as a life-altering event, the drone said quietly. Thomas exhaled. That's one way to put it. Outside, Verdania's artificial night shimmered softly. The atmospheric regulators dimmed the sky in gradual layers, revealing carefully curated constellations. Even the stars here were chosen. He wondered what Earth's sky looked like tonight. Messy, imperfect. Real. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The door unfolded silently. Queen Elara stepped inside. She wore no ceremonial armor now, no crown, no symbols of authority, just simple garments, flowing and unstructured. Without the weight of her station, she seemed younger, not less powerful, just more visible. Thomas stood awkwardly. I wasn't sure if I was allowed to leave, he said. You are not a prisoner, she replied. That's reassuring. She stepped closer, her ears angled toward him, sensing the subtle rhythms of his nervous system. Still unstable, still honest. I frightened you, she said. He hesitated. Yes, she nodded once. That was not my intention. He studied her. She was not apologizing as a queen. She was apologizing as a person. That proposal, he said carefully. Did you mean it? She did not hesitate. Yes. The word hung in the air between them. Unprotected. Unpolished. True. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't think anyone's ever proposed to me because of pasta. Her expression shifted slightly. Your food was not the cause. He frowned. It was the proof. He blinked. She stepped closer. Your food revealed something I had forgotten, she said quietly. Her ears lowered slightly, not in weakness, but in vulnerability. It reminded me that I am still capable of feeling. He did not know what to say, so he told the truth. I was planning to leave Verdania. She froze, not visibly, but he felt it. Her ears stilled. Her breathing paused. I thought, he continued, that this place didn't need people like me. She spoke carefully. And now? He looked at her. Really looked. Not the queen, the person. Now he understood something he hadn't before. Verdania wasn't perfect. It was lonely, just like her, just like him. Now, he said slowly, I think maybe it does. She did not smile, but something inside her relaxed. A tension carried for years loosened slightly, not gone, but changed. Outside, the palace systems continued their endless work. Political structures adjusted. Advisors panicked quietly in distant rooms. Entire predictive models rewrote themselves to accommodate a future they had not anticipated. Inside this room, none of that mattered. Elara reached out, slowly, carefully, not as a ruler claiming ownership, as a person asking permission. Thomas hesitated only for a moment before taking her hand. Her fingers were warm, real, not distant, not untouchable. B12 rotated quietly. This represents a statistically significant emotional development, the drone said softly. Thomas glanced at it. Thank you for narrating my life. You are welcome. He looked back at her. I don't know what happens next. She nodded. Neither do I. For the first time in her life, that uncertainty did not terrify her. It felt free. Days passed, then weeks. Thomas returned to the gardens. Not as a vendor, as himself. He still cooked at his small stall, still grew his illegal basil, still argued with B12 about chopping techniques. But now sometimes the queen visited. Not with guards, not with ceremony. She stood beside him listening to the sounds of something simple, something alive. She learned to cook, poorly. Her first attempt resulted in something that legally qualified as a structural hazard. Thomas laughed. She laughed too. The sound surprised them both. Verdania changed. Not its structure, its soul. The queen still ruled, but now she also lived. And Thomas, the human who had once believed himself insignificant, understood something at last. He had not changed the galaxy. He had changed something far more fragile. He had reminded someone powerful that she was still a person. And in doing so, he had finally found a place where he belonged. Not as decoration, not as an outsider, but as someone seen. Above them, Verdania's perfect sky shimmered quietly. For once, it did not try to improve anything. It simply watched.